Good morning and welcome to First Baptist Church. Thank you for joining us today for our Bible study, and we're in a passage from Luke chapter 6 today, and we are talking about the hard sayings of Jesus. And today he says, love your enemies. That's a pretty hard saying, isn't it? That's a good saying to start off with, to see what he really was saying as we look at that today. Well, love your enemies even as Jesus has loved you. So when we make application to how much God loved us, even while we were yet sinners, then how much more should we share that love with others? And sometimes it's hard to love other people. But we're going to talk about that today. Well, in Luke chapter 6, we have what is called the Sermon on the Plain. Now, what kind of sermon do we have in the book of Matthew? We have, what do we have? The Sermon on the Mount. So in chapters 5 through 7 of Matthew, we have Sermon on the Mount. So this is Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus gave, that Matthew records in his book. Well, Jesus was not setting down conditions for becoming a disciple. So he wasn't talking to people who were not Christians, who were not believers. He was talking to believers, as was what Matthew recorded in Sermon on the Mount. He was talking how we are to live our lives as believers. It's what he expects of us. Of course, we know it's difficult to live in perfection to what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, and the same would apply here. So he was providing instructions for believers as to how to follow him, how to live their lives, what kind of actions they were supposed to take, and kind of what he expected of them. So this verse and the verses for this session deal with love. And we know about God's love because we've experienced his love through our faith in Jesus Christ. We know that God loves us and that we are to love others as well. Jesus said that many, many different times throughout his life and ministry. So followers of Jesus were to love others, love themselves, love others, their fellow Christians, but to love everyone, others. That includes everybody. So it was a different kind of love that Jesus was talking about here. It was different from the culture, from application, and different because of its source. He makes one startling statement when he says, love your enemies. So these verses include Luke's record of the golden rule. So we'll come to that in just a few minutes. Well, in verses 27-28, we start there with what Jesus says about loving enemies. When he says, but I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. So that would be a shocker to hear, hey, love your enemies. The opposite of what we do as human beings, we don't want to love our enemies. We don't like people who don't treat us well. We can't reach out to love them. But Jesus is saying, love others as Jesus has loved us. So the people in Jesus' day, they knew what the Old Testament said in Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor. And so they had a big discussion over who is my neighbor, as the guy who asked Jesus that. So to the Jews, it might be a fellow Jew, maybe somebody else other than that, once or twice or every now and then to do that. But the Jews had, especially the Pharisees, has a rigid application of who their neighbor is. It would have to be somebody exactly like them. They couldn't love anybody else. Well, Jesus used a good story about that, an application, when he gave the story about the Good Samaritan. You know, Good Samaritan, he was not even a Jew, and he took care of this Jew while the Jews passed him up and would not help him. So he used that as an illustration. So the message was a radical message when he said, love your enemies. Well, was it reasonable to love one something like that? Is it possible to love someone like that? I guess it would be. How could anyone be expected to love or welcome and entertain or be fond of, and in its strongest form, love dearly? How can anybody do that when it would be your enemy? So Jesus is concerned that we follow through on it and show our love in concrete service for the sinner. Jesus, God did that. He loved us and we were sinners. So our model is God himself, not if somebody else loves somebody else, but he is our model when we think about how God set things up for us. So he was saying what no rabbi or what no teacher had ever declared before, to love your enemies. The command to love one's enemies does not appeal to the emotions, but it appeals to the will, to our will. Jesus did not command us to feel in a certain way, but to act in a certain way. So he's not talking about, you got to feel good about loving somebody. You have to act to show your love to someone else. So it's not to feel in a certain way, but to act in a certain way. So the command to love one's enemies is not directed to how we feel, but it's how we react and act. Loving God, loving one's enemies is an act of faith in a God who is love. John 1:7 says that. So from a normal perspective from human beings, loving our enemies was beyond reason. No way can I love enemies, he was saying. So most people, all humans would use common sense. Nope, don't want to do that. Can't get around to doing that. Wouldn't even want to entertain that. Couldn't do that. So Jesus was not opposed to acting with reason, though. You got to act with reason, but he took it to a higher plane when he said common sense attitudes and actions reflects one's faith in God. So what we do and how we act reflects how we believe and trust in God to carry us through. So we take it to a higher plane. Common sense attitudes and actions reflects one's faith in God. Well, so the mandate, that's a mandate that Jesus gives. The Sermon on the Mount was a mandate. Jesus gave mandates throughout his words and teachings to his disciples and to us. We know what a mandate is. You do it. It's a command. You do it. So it's not natural to say, I don't like you. So the mandate is to love your enemies. Love your enemies and do good to them that hate you. So we know it's not natural. So these are faith-based responses on the conviction that God's in control of everything. Certainly He is. So these are faith responses based on convictions that we are to do. He will provide security for us. He will act justly. The things that we consider of utmost importance in this life are really not. What we think is the most important thing in our lives really are not. And in the end, vengeance belongs to Him. We are not to take vengeance or judge anyone else. God does that. So in other words, we trust Him to care for us and to help us face, even as we face our enemies. So we know that. Well, Jesus offers no exceptions. There are no exceptions to the rules. We know what that means. When whatever it is, somebody sets up a set of rules, if it's in school, if it's in workplace or in a club or whatever, there are rules and there are no exceptions. If you break the rule, you're out of the game. Like in sports. I was going to use the illustration of the Kentucky Derby, but he didn't intentionally break the rules. That horse drifted on him and impeded the other horses, so he was disqualified. That was a shame. But he talked earlier before that about the crowd noise and the horse was nervous, so he just drifted over there in front of those other horses. Anyway, there are no exceptions to the rules, as we see. So different words, difficult words to hear, let alone to practice when Jesus says, love your enemies. It's hard to carry it out. Yeah, Lord, I know we're supposed to love, but Lord, it's kind of hard. Lord, some of those people I just have a hard time getting used to or thinking about accepting them or loving them. It is difficult. But Jesus says, love your enemies, even those who mistreat you. Wow, that's pretty strong. Even those who mistreat you. They're not nice to you or whatever they do to you. Anyway, so that's the start. Then we go to verses 29 and 31. He talks about loving others may require some action on our part. So let me read those verses. He says, if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking your tunic. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. We know as the golden rule. So, there are several things here that Jesus is pointing out. It talks about a slap on the face, first of all. If somebody slaps you on the face, yeah, turn the other cheek. We know people respond to that. But if somebody slaps you on the face, it's usually a backhand deal. So that's an insult to someone if you slap them on the face. In the old times, when somebody slapped someone on the face, that was reason for a duel. Let's shoot it out. And you offended me, you embarrassed me, and so we're going to shoot it out. So it might not cause injury to be slapped on the face, but it sure causes embarrassment and an insult. So even so, the disciples of Jesus were not to be driven by a revenge motive. Don't take revenge if somebody embarrasses you or insults you by slapping you on the face. Well, we don't get slapped on the face very often today, but we do get insulted. And the same application would apply here. Don't react to a person who insults you and want to get even with him. So if someone strikes you on one cheek, then turn to him the other. It was an action against the person because of his commitment to Jesus, some say. A lot of people didn't like Christians back in those days, and so they would try to offend them or insult them or even slap them on the face. And Jesus said, don't do that. Today we'd say if somebody insults you, just turn around and walk away and end the confrontation. So Jesus said, hey, if somebody slaps you on one cheek, then just turn the other and get another slap in or see if he will do that. So that's what he was saying there when he says, if somebody slaps you. Now he gets around to someone taking your tunic. If someone takes your cloak, do not stop him from taking the tunic also. Wow. If a thief takes your outer garment, give him hey, you need it more than I need it, here you go. Take it away. I've heard people say that through the years. Somebody stole something. Well, they mustn't need it more than I need it. So there it goes. Type of thing. So assume the person needs it or he thinks he needs it. Oh yeah, it looks pretty nice. I believe I'll take it. To resist probably wouldn't help. In fact, it could be dangerous. Today it could be dangerous. So if you try to confront somebody, they might get really ugly, might have a weapon of some kind. That could be dangerous. So it's not worth a piece of clothing or whatever it is they're trying to take. If they're trying to rob you, say, here, take my wallet, take whatever, just go on. You don't want to get in a confrontation with someone that's holding a knife or a gun. Money you can replace. A watch you can replace or whatever else. So don't try to challenge somebody. Just go ahead and give it, take it, and you're safe. They've gone, so you don't have to worry about that. And he also says, give to everyone who asks. If somebody asks you, this is another example. They ask for help or assistance. Now, we see a lot of that where we live, and I imagine everywhere around the country now. People are always asking for some kind of help or assistance. And it's hard to come to the point of where you say, well, they're telling the truth, they're worthy, I'm going to help them. Or they're conning. It's a con game. They're trying to get what they can because whatever reason. So it's really difficult to think about that. To somebody ask you for something. But it's the essence of love, God's kind of love, when we're willing to reach out to people who have need as well. Acting for the good of others may not call for turning the other cheek. Sometimes we cannot or do not turn the other cheek for not giving a person everything they ask for. Jesus was not saying everything about Christian love. This was not a theology of Christian love. Jesus was saying this is everyday living. If you confront someone who wants your cloak, excuse me, wants something from you, then you're willing to try to give. But sometimes, no, I can't help you today. I'm not going to help you. So he says we may be more, well, I'll get around to it. Doing good to others even at risk or cost to ourselves. So sometimes it's going to cost us something, or sometimes we're taking a risk by helping others. So we need to be careful with that. But then he moves into what we know as the golden rule. Do to others as you would have them to do to you. That statement or versions of that statement appear in many other religions. You can read any other religion and you'll see that statement in some form. But the thing about it, in what Jesus said, it's a positive thing. It's a positive statement as we think about what Jesus says here. He makes it a positive statement because discipline is a matter of what one does. And places we find that statement, it's what we don't do. Don't do this. So Jesus says, do to others as you would have them do to you. And so a longer extended statement in Matthew, I believe it is, as he said. Therefore, the best thing that we want for ourselves is to be the minimum standards of what we desire for others. Disciples of Jesus are to be agents of good. So we are to try to do good for others, share with others. The golden rule is important because we do to others from the Christian perspective, not for some advantage for ourselves or to deny somebody something. So consider what the statement was addressed. Sometimes it's a saying of Jesus, as many people quote widely. What they would desire from others and what they would do in return will reflect the values and personhood of the holy God that we worship. So to take this statement from some other version other than our Christian faith would not be good to use because we're trying to take advantage of someone else or we would help them in the wrong way. So what we value in personhood of the holy God in heaven. So if we have given ourselves over to God, we are acting with the word grace. We are gracing someone. We're helping someone through the grace of God. That God has blessed us and we're able to help someone, whether it be a meal or whatever it might be. We're gracing them because God has blessed us and loved us even while we were yet sinners. Then we turn to verses 32, 36 to talk about the final portion of our study here for today. And as soon as I turn the page, I'll be ready to go. Our love flows out of the love that Christ has shown for us. So let's read those verses. He says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Well, Jesus continued to help his disciples understand the kind of love he's talking about. When he talks about he would not deny those who were not his followers or loved ones, they too could do good. Other people can do good. You don't have to be a Christian to do good to others or to help others. Or as he says here, if they need, excuse me, if you do good to those who are good, even sinners do that. If you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, but of course they want to get interest back on it. They want to make money off of it. So that's the difference from the Christian perspective and the other non-believers' perspective. So anyway, he says, what good or what benefit or what credit is that to you? How are you blessed? How does that help you if you do it with ultra motives? You're trying to gain something from it. If you're good to somebody else, sometimes you're expecting or trying to get something in return, that they be good to you. Well, I won't go into that. The description, like a kid wants to get something from another kid, they have something, oh, I'll give you this, and, you know, I'll be good to you if you give me what you got. So sometimes trying to be good to others, we are expecting more than just being good. Our motive is suspect there when we think about that. So the grace of God comes into play. The word rendered thank or benefit or credit means grace, grace that God has given to us. And if you do good to them that do good to you, what credit is that you? It's just reciprocal. Okay, I'll mow your lawn today, you mow my lawn tomorrow, kind of thing. What benefit do we get out of that to help someone else? Then he keeps posing that question as he goes through that. You're not being any different from sinners or anybody else if you do the same thing that they do. And then in verse 34, he kind of gives a summary here as we think about what he's saying. In verse 34, he says, no, it's not the summary. He said, if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. So we contrast what a sinner and what sinners do. Sinners lend to sinners because they expect a repayment and an interest and profit from that. In Jesus' time and even in our time today, people are willing to lend at exorbitant rates to get something and make a lot of money. We understand that. So we contrast lending or whatever we do, being good to someone else from the perspective of a person of faith and from the perspective of a non-Christian or non-believer in what we do. So sinners do those things motivated by expectation of a personal gain. We should not expect a personal gain. When we do something good for others, even if we lend to them. And it's striking that he said, even sinners lend expecting to be repaid, but love your... even sinners, if you lend to those who you expect to repay, what credit? Even sinners lend to sinners expecting to be repaid. Lend to them without expecting to get anything back. And a lot of times, lending, somebody said if you want to get in trouble or if you lend to family, then you get in trouble. Because mostly you don't ever get it back. So it doesn't come back. So if you're going to lend a good friend or a family member and you know they need some money and you're going to lend to them, you do it without knowing that you may never get it back, which is true. And I know probably all of us have experienced that before. So that's what he says about that. But there's nothing wrong about liking people, doing good for people, helping people, for those who do good to us, but it's not unusual. Jesus said, don't do that. He said, it's unusual because people want to do something for something in return. Believers will do normal things, what normal people do, but they will not settle for that. They strive to do more because we are God's children and want to bring honor to Him. Now, in verse 35, he brings up the summary of what he said in all the previous verses. He said, love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So he summarized it. Love your enemies, do good, and lend to those who have need. So the verb form here is a continue and active. Not just do it one time, but continue to do that. To help people. To love your enemies, to do good, and to lend to people who might have needs. And hoping for then Jesus said, you will be rewarded and your reward will be great. What will the reward be? We don't know, but he goes on to say, we shall be recognized as children of the Most High. And that's a name for God that emphasizes His supremacy and His superiority over all things. And according to this one person, the verb shall be, will be, should not be understood as will become, but rather will show yourselves to be. So by doing these things, Jesus said, you will be recognized as children of the Most High. People will see that in the lives of faithful people, of Christians. that we will be recognized by them even as children of God. Non-Christians see Christians, and hopefully they see in us that we are different from them, that we do things according to our faith and how we live. Unfortunately, the difficulty is most Christians don't live any different than non-Christians, and so there's no difference. So why should they be different? Why should they be a Christian? Why should they come to Jesus as a believer? So God is gracious and merciful towards all people, even the evil, even the unfaithful, all people. The rain falls on good and evil folks. God blesses all people as a result of who He is. So we should be willing to recognize that. And then He says, be merciful just as your Father is merciful in heaven. Well, one final point here. We just have a couple minutes here. But the idea is that when we think about following Jesus, calls for us to submit to Him. And one demand that causes us to struggle sometimes is, if I'm to love everybody, even those kind of people, do I have to do that? Do I have to do it, Lord? That's a good thought. Do I have to do that? Yes, it's not really a have to thing, but it should be something we want to do. That's the difference in what Jesus is asking us to do. Even if you go back to the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:7, the Beatitudes and all the other things. It's almost impossible to live up to all those things 100%, but we should want to do it, not looking at a rules list of things you do or things you don't do, but it's things we want to do. It's things we ought to do, and it's things that we do and want to do for Jesus Christ. So that's the most important part. We want to do it. We want to do our best for the Lord and serving Him and living for Him and influencing other people in our people who come into contact with, family, friends, neighbors, everywhere that we meet people, should seek to reach out to them with God's love and to treat them as God would have us to treat them. So it can be a joy, it can be a challenge in our lives, but it's something we should want to do in serving the Lord. When He says, love your enemies, do good to them, and lend without expecting anything in return. So that's a pretty strong statements that Jesus made there in this lesson. Love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them if possible. If they want your cloak, let them have it. Give them the rest of it as well. Well, thanks for being here today and joining us for this time. And we thank you so much. And next week we'll pick it up again with another hard saying from Luke chapter 9. And that title is, Let the Dead Bury the Dead. So, guy came and asked Jesus a question. I want to follow you, but let me go and bury my father first. Well, his father wasn't dead right then, so he wanted to hang around for several years till his father died, and then I'll come and go with you. So we'll look at the aspects of what that means. Well, thanks for being here today, and thanks for joining us. We hope to see you next Sunday. Stay tuned for our worship service coming up at 11 o'clock. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your tough words, for words that are not a do it if you want to, but words that say do these things, a command, do these things. So help us to have the attitude and the heart for doing it because we want to do that. We want to serve you in this way, to meet the needs of others and to share the gospel of love with others who need to know Jesus Christ. Give us strength for this week. Watch over us and keep us safe in your care, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.